Viewers, this is Kamachima at my YouTube channel, Kamachima, and my show's name is definitely Perspective. So today we have the honor to have Mr. Michael Kugelman, who is an American scholar, and he's the Deputy Director of the Asia Program, and he's a Senior Associate for South Asia at the Wilson Center. And he's known as one of the leading specialists and expert on Afghanistan, India, and Pakistan. And he regularly appears on all Pakistani and Indian channels. And meanwhile, he also writes for the New York Times, Foreign Policy, Foreign Affairs, and he's read and watched globally. So thank you very much, Michael, for sparing time for us and my viewers in India and Pakistan.
Well, thank you. I appreciate the kind introduction, and thanks for having me. Look forward to the discussion.
Yeah, thank you very much. So let's start. Before going into India, Pakistan, I just read the, although this is informal, but I'm saying that I read the statement coming from New Delhi, where the Indian Prime Minister has shown concern for the developments going on in the US. So how does it look to the American government or American State Department that a developing country, maybe a lot of dependent on America, and talking about showing concerns about the internal matters of the United States? What would be the possible response of the State Department, or do you think they will ignore this?
Well, yes. I mean, I imagine the State Department will ignore that particular component of this revelation that Modi indicated his concern about the protest here in the U.S. I think that there are many more important issues that came out of that call between Modi and Trump, and such as involving the G7 and the India-China dispute. Those will have the follow-up. But I think it's a sign of the times that we live in a world, as you know, where inequalities and racism and intolerance and all these very unfortunate things are so prominent and so pronounced, including in large democracies like the United States. But certainly, you and I and those that study South Asia could certainly appreciate the irony of this, given that India itself has been convulsed by a number of manifestations of social unrest in recent months, including some pretty nasty riots that played out when President Trump himself was in Delhi earlier this year. And of course, the Indian government is known for criticizing other countries for being critical of India's domestic policies. So you could say it's a case of the pot calling the kettle black, but I look at it as a case of this is a sign of the times. You have these types of disturbances everywhere, including in the United States, and it's very troubling for sure what's happening in the U.S. now.
Okay, so coming to the more to the discussion now, which I had thought that I should have with you. America and Pakistan, they are known as the most trusted partners. They are known as most, allied partners and the most sanctioned partners for long. So, but I want to speak that we have seen how things have turned in these last 20 years, and the cooperation has moved after this war, after 9/11. So, how do you see the cooperation which started in July last year when Prime Minister Imran Khan and the Army Chief visited the United States? Do you think things are moving in a right trajectory? Does Pakistan has the capability to take or to engage with the US the way American has the capability or the capacity to give us? So how do you see this Pakistan-US relations post Imran and Bajwa's visit to US?
Yeah, it's a great question. That the U.S.-Pakistan relationship is often referred to as a bad marriage. It's probably one of the most overused metaphors in international relations. The U.S.-Pakistan relationship is a bad marriage. There's been concerns that during the worst points of the relationship that there could be a divorce, but they work together because they have to. I feel that metaphor is a bit overdone. But at any rate, it's a very tough relationship. It's easy to forget that it actually was a pretty solid relationship on some quite strong ground during the Cold War era, when the U.S. and Pakistan worked fairly close together, with some exceptions. Certainly, it's gotten more complicated in the post 9/11 environment. But looking to what's happened over the last few years, I would argue that the U.S.-Pakistan relationship started to improve significantly sometime before Imran Khan and General Bajwa came to Washington last summer. I mean, as you'll know, the President Trump said some very unpleasant things about Pakistan soon after he took office. So the relationship was in bad shape. Security aid was canceled, was suspended. But then the Trump administration decided that its biggest goal in South Asia was to find a way to get out of Afghanistan, and it wanted to pursue a deal with the Taliban that would allow it to have the political cover for a withdrawal. And the recognition was that you need to work with Pakistan to make that happen. So I think that it was really Pakistan's role in helping facilitate talks between U.S. negotiators and the Taliban that gave the relationship the big boost that it did, to the point that Imran Khan was invited to the White House in great part because of the Trump administration's perception that it had been very helpful. And indeed, it's continued to improve in recent months. But I think that for those of us that are proponents of the U.S.-Pakistan relationship, one of the concerns is that from Washington's perspective, the way that it looks at Pakistan and its relationship with Pakistan is almost exclusively and uniquely through the lens of Afghanistan. So, in many cases, the U.S.-Pakistan relationship has suffered because of that Afghan lens. When you had the Haqqani network carrying out attacks on Afghanistan that the U.S. blamed, or the U.S. was blaming these attacks on U.S. forces on the Haqqani network, which had a presence in Pakistan, and many of us here think it still has a presence in Pakistan. So the relationship was bad. But now when the U.S. decided it would want to get Pakistan's help to move forward on a peace process, the relationship improved. I think the question, though, is looking at the future. Once U.S. forces have left Afghanistan, and make no mistake, they will, what does that mean for the U.S.-Pakistan relationship? And I think there'll be a need to find a new basis or a new anchor for the relationship. And I think that may be easier from the Pakistan side, from the U.S. side, because I think Pakistan may be more keen to broaden the relationship beyond Afghanistan than the U.S. is at this point.
Okay, that's good. We have elaborated this way. But, the one thing many Pakistanis have in this mind, and we have been seeing that since last 72 years of history of this country, we have seen irritants. We have seen relationship and irritants. Earlier, during the first, 50s and 60s, when Pakistan and the United States were having an alliance, and there was an irritant, and that irritant was on India. So then again, during 70s, 80s, when Pakistan and US again aligned, and that there was an irritant when this Cold War was going on, and that was a nuclear. And then again, after the Cold War, after this World War II, after 9/11, Pakistan and the US allied, and then irritant was on Taliban. So there is everywhere there is a security. My question is that how can Pakistan engage with the US other than security? Does Pakistan really have those options and tools to engage other than security? Or if no, what things I think you can suggest the Pakistani state and society that we need to build with the US for an engagement other than security? Although security engagement is needed, but other than security, also more broader strategic partnership.
Yeah, it's a great question. Indeed, it's true that the relationship has been dominated by security situations, which is unfortunate for the relationship because that's where the tensions lie, in the security realm. It's interesting. There actually has been more progress on the economic side than we tend to hear. I mean, in recent years, the US and Pakistan have broken new records for bilateral trade volume. And this is something that US officials tend to play up. And I know that in Islamabad, there's a strong desire to build on that economic cooperation and make it into something bigger. I know that here in Washington, U.S. officials, and I've heard them tell me this privately, they are genuinely interested in building out a better economic partnership with Pakistan, which again has seen a fair amount of progress in recent years. But I just don't know if the U.S. is ready to go at the same pace with that Pakistan does. I mean, there's still a lot of concern in Washington. There's still a mistrust factor, still concern about this issue of harboring terrorist assets, which is, at least with the Trump administration, is still a pretty strongly held view that Pakistan is not doing as much as it should. And I think that at least with the Trump administration, which, it may be out of power in a few months because of an election, the Trump administration, I think, wants to see more progress on two fronts. First, it wants to see more progress on bringing the Afghan peace process forward. It would like to see Pakistan push the Taliban to agree to some new reduction in violence agreement so that the peace process can really get started. And also the U.S. would like to see more progress on Pakistan dealing more with the terrorism financing issue, Pakistan, of course, is under a lot of pressure from that with the FATF. But beyond that, I think there's a lot of potential. If you look at the past, there is a very strong, it's easy to forget about this now. There is a very interesting and robust legacy of people-to-people relations between the two countries. You look at educational exchanges. You hear mentioned so often that the Fulbright program has a very large program when it comes to the U.S. and Pakistan. And if you go really far back, before you or I were born, well before you or I were born, back in the 1950s, you actually had Hollywood stars going to Lahore to film movies. I mean, it's extraordinary to think that. You had Humphrey Bogart. I can't remember the name of the movie, but there was one movie that he did that was filmed in Lahore, as I recall. So there is that legacy. And I think here, and I'll end here, you have to look to the issue of the diaspora. I mean, we hear so often about this Pakistani diaspora in the US, which has long been seen as a bridge for the relationship. You have folks that are very successful here in the US in the medical field, health sciences, engineering, whatnot. They can be very helpful to try to improve relations between the countries through their own fields. I mean, you have a very prominent Pakistani-American doctors group called APNA here in the US, which has done a lot to try to provide training and capacity building support to those in Pakistan. So the diaspora could be a really big bridge, though I would argue that the diaspora is a fast-growing one here in the U.S. It's one of the fastest-growing Asian diasporas in the U.S. But it is a bit unorganized, and unlike the Indian one, which is a lot larger and a lot more organized, you have some members of the diaspora that really don't want to get involved in politics and international relations. Others do, but they're looking for better platforms to help them. So that's a work in progress. But I do think the diaspora is so important in thinking of how to build this relationship out in ways beyond security.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I think the diaspora can play a major role for this because the more a diaspora is institutionalized into the American apparatus, that can help many Pakistanis and can improve relation. And especially I was thinking for the American elections, many of the Pakistanis are recognized as Asian American, rather they should be recognized as Pakistani American, because a clear categorization is required because Asia is very big. So we just can't work that the Indians are there, which are dominant in so many things. So I think, yes, diaspora can play a role. Now, Mr. Michael, we should move on to another question, and that is recently Zalmay Khalilzad gave an interview to Hasani Haider in the Hindu. And he spoke that, and there was a lot of hue and cry in Pakistan, by the way, at that time. And he spoke that the Taliban should have direct talk with India. So it has not happened for long, and they could now think of this. And we saw that the response came from the Taliban as well, that yes, we can have talks with the Indians. And there was fake posters as well, which were roaming around on social media, that after the Eid, the Taliban will attack India and so and so. But although that was fake and nothing was like that. So the Taliban leadership want to have talks with India. Do you think what kind of talks these would be? Because maybe the Indians believe that Taliban are going to be in Afghan apparatus very soon. So what can the talk, and how it can help for the Afghanistan's peace?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think one of the most striking evolutions in regional politics in South Asia just over the last few months is how India's thinking about the Taliban peace process has changed. For a long time, India was the lone holdout. It really did not support the idea of talks, much less a peace process, but even the idea of talks with the Taliban and the US and the Afghan government, that was anathema for the thinking in New Delhi. But that certainly has changed. I mean, you're starting to see more on the record comments about how maybe you should consider this. And within the Indian strategic community, the analysts and journalists have been talking more about this possibility. I think it was telling that you had one or two retired Indian diplomats that attended a meeting in Moscow not too long ago, in which the Taliban was present, trying to build support for an intra-Afghan dialogue. So I think that for India, it's essentially reading the writing on the wall. It recognizes that the only way to get this war to end in Afghanistan is if you have a negotiated outcome. And to get that process going and to get peace talks sustained and going on, you're going to need a lot of players involved, not just the Afghan state, not just the US for that matter, but other outsiders. And certainly the Pakistanis are involved, the Russians, the Chinese, even some Central Asian states have demonstrated a desire to get involved. So I think the thinking for New Delhi is that, if there is a role for it to play that can maximize the chances that you can get a peace process started to end the war, then maybe that's a good thing. But New Delhi remains very concerned, and I think for good reason. And that's because, even if a peace process begins between the Taliban and the Afghan government, in all likelihood, if there were a successful deal, and that's a big if, but if there were a successful process resulting in a deal, it would result in a power-sharing deal with the Taliban holding some degree of power. And that's very worrisome to India for good reason, and we understand why. So I think that's why India is still being very cautious. I think that so long as Pakistan continues to play a role in this process, that may limit what India could do. Though, quite frankly, I'm not sure how much of a role Pakistan would have in this next phase of the talks, given that the Afghan government will be involved and it really doesn't trust Pakistan all that much. There's one thing for the Pakistanis to be involved in the US Taliban dialogue, because both sides wanted them there. But it'll be a lot tougher for India. But I think India, basically, to summarize, India is reading the writing on the wall, and it realizes that if you want to end this war, it needs to be done through negotiation, and that's going to need key inputs from all major regional players. And India should be seen as as an important regional player in this regard.
Okay, so definitely Pakistan might have some reservations on this, that, if Taliban are coming in the apparatus, I think that is where Pakistan believes that neither the Karzai nor the Ashraf Ghani could give space to Pakistan, but Pakistan in Afghanistan. So having Taliban in apparatus may give us some space in decision making in Afghanistan, because we really want that Afghanistan is a place where our perspective should be at least considered for, because we have so many concerns for them. Okay, that's good. Now coming to the other topic, that is definitely Pakistan and India. So I would like to ask you that India has been, since Prime Minister Modi is in office since 2014, and we have seen this escalation ladder is going on high, and we have not seen that things are going down. And the Indians say that Pakistan, the Modi government is doing what they have written in the manifesto. So since the manifesto has been honored by the people of India twice, so they have all the right to do and act the way as per the manifesto of the BJP. So India is blaming Pakistan for this, that Pakistan is having launch pads, and this blame game is going so long. And so how do you see that Pakistan is taking the UN observers there, Pakistan is taking the international media there, and Pakistan has asked that anyone can go there anytime. On the other hand, Indians don't have this facility for neither UN observers nor so how do you see that how this blame coming from India is going to can derail the peace process for furthermore?
You're talking about a peace process in terms of Afghanistan or India and Pakistan?
No. India. I'm talking
Right.
that since they are talking that we have these launch pads, they blame Pakistan for launch pads. The
Right.
Indians blame. So, and I'm saying that we have allowed the UN observers, the international media to go there. So, how can we move on with this idea that Pakistan says that if we have to move forward, this blame game must end against Pakistan of launch pads?
Well, it's a really tough thing, for sure. This is a relationship that had been in pretty bad shape for quite a few years, and you had several shocks. One being the Pulwama Balakot situation, and then, of course, the repeal of Article 370 last year, which sort of like two big blows coming in quick succession it's made it very difficult to move forward. I think India has made it very clear that it's going to take a very maximalist, uncompromising position on the issue of terror. It doesn't appear to be appeased by the Pakistani position that there's no terrorism infrastructure or anything like that in AJK. Or anywhere else in Pakistan for that matter. India doesn't seem to believe that. I think India is looking for much more ambitious signs from Pakistan, such as basically getting rid of vestiges of every single evidence, every single input, or every single data point representing a terrorist network in Pakistan. I just think it's playing a tough game. It's playing hardball, India. I really don't think it has much of an interest in trying to ease tensions with Pakistan, but I think it goes both ways, to be quite frank. As you noted, the Modi government is carrying out its agenda, which it's outlined in its manifestos for a number of years. And obviously, it's a Hindu nationalist agenda, and it leaves very little space to engage in conciliatory acts with Pakistan, right? And what people in New Delhi will say is, well, we tried to make things better with Pakistan. We tried to extend an olive branch soon after Modi took office. When you had him come to Lahore, it was a very significant moment. And then India will say, well, soon after that, we had these terrorist attacks in Pathankot, Uri, and so on. So, I think the idea from New Delhi is, well, if you're asking us to engage in one of these Nixon goes to China moments where you have a hardliner like Modi that decides to sort of go against his own views and reach out to Pakistan, he's already tried that and it didn't work. That would be the Indian perspective. And I think what I see from the Pakistan side is that once India repealed Article 370, basically took Jammu and Kashmir off the table for any potential future negotiations, and said, well, if you want to talk to us about Kashmir, it's going to be about India occupied Kashmir, about AJK. And clearly that puts Pakistan in a tough position where it really has no incentive to want to talk to India, because that's not what it wants to talk about. So very difficult state of affairs. I don't necessarily see things getting worse in the India-Pakistan relationship, but I certainly don't see them getting any better. And I think that the rhetoric is very strong. I mean, from both sides, the rhetoric coming from your government about the Indian government being Nazi, fascist, genocidal, it doesn't go over very well in India, to say the least. Whereas, of course, on the Indian side, we hear Pakistan described as a terrorist state and all that. So I'm not optimistic. And if you want to look on the bright side, in October, theoretically, there's supposed to be a Shanghai Cooperation Organization meet hosted by Modi, which theoretically means that all members would be invited to the meeting, including Prime Minister Imran Khan. Will things improve enough that we would get to the point in October where Khan or someone lower level than him would go to that meeting in India? I don't necessarily think so.
Yeah, you are absolutely right that the people from both sides, I think they need to do more for making things better. But coming to this point that since last 20 years, I'm left with a couple of questions. This is maybe the second last questions. Since last 20 years, I believe that Musharraf started this composite dialogue, and then it ended at the Mumbai blast, and then in People's Party tenure from 8 to 13, Prime Minister Gilani, Prime Minister Raja Ashraf, and Zardari himself went to India, and then Nawaz Sharif, he also went there, and he had a discussion. Although things got worse, then Imran Khan came and he also spoke that yes, we will wait for one more year so that the Modi government is elected again, and we will talk with the fresh mandate of the Modi government so that we can move forward with this 5 years plan, and then Imran Khan will have 4 years. In these 20 years, the Pakistani authorities or the apparatus here believes that we have done everything to, although many of the time, whatever the political leadership was doing here was not liked, but Pakistan was like in a position that we were opening up to India, or we gave this confidence to India, but something happens inside the process. So is there any belief in international community that Pakistan is no more a hardliner in terms of getting hawk on India, because Pakistan is offering to talk, Pakistan wants to engage, Pakistan wants to negotiate, and Modi government herself, they started this comprehensive dialogue, when the Sushma Swaraj came here in Islamabad. So is there any image somewhere in the world that Pakistan wants to move on, but here India is a hardliner, which is not letting, because from Pakistan, every time prime ministers are going in India. So how do you see this?
Yeah, well, certainly I think the Musharraf formula was probably the closest that we've gotten to launch some type of dialogue or peace process between the two. It's a shame we haven't come close to that since then, unfortunately. So, to be very candid, when it comes to how the international community perceives Pakistan in this story, Pakistan really doesn't have a very good image overseas for a number of reasons. You know about them. The whole bin Laden raid made things even worse in terms of how Pakistan is perceived. So I think that there's a hesitation on the part of international analysts, certainly in Washington and beyond. There's a hesitation to give Pakistan the benefit of the doubt here. Certainly there is, I think, acknowledgement, properly so, that the public messaging from Pakistan has been very encouraging, particularly when you had the Pulwama Balakot crisis last year. It was Imran Khan that came across as the more conciliatory compared to Modi, and the fact that Pakistan released the Indian pilot before things got out of control. That was basically a de-escalatory measure right there. Now, he could have been under heavy pressure from the U.S. to do that, but still, the fact that he did it is significant. But I think that what many overseas continue to find troubling is that if Pakistan really is interested in moving forward with India and finding a way to resume some type of dialogue, then the rhetoric needs to become less heated. I think there's still a lot of concern about that. I mean, certainly, you have U.S. officials who privately will express concern about the direction that India is taking with the Hindu nationalist agenda, with these authoritarian manifestations. But I haven't come across anyone here in the U.S. or, quite frankly, in interactions with others overseas in recent months that believe it's conducive to repeatedly paint Modi as a Hitler-type figure. That the perception is that rhetoric is just too strong, and particularly if Pakistan wants to position itself as a player that's ready to, move past the baggage and the mistrust of the past and figure out a way to get things started. That's a concern. But I think the bigger issue is what I mentioned before, that the dynamics of a potential peace process have changed because India has unilaterally taken Jammu and Kashmir off the table and said that they would only talk about Pakistan-administered Kashmir, and that's a problem for Pakistan as well. But certainly, to end, indeed, over the last few years, the dynamic has changed in the sense that Narendra Modi, or at least his government, the way it's perceived by international analysts is very different from how, say, the Manmohan Singh and Manmohan Singh himself were perceived by Americans and others overseas, that this is a hardline, very conservative government in India that wants to take maximalist, uncompromising positions on so many things, including its relationship with Pakistan.
Well, this is my last question to you, and you're talking of Manmohan Singh and his perspective. I think when Manmohan Singh was the prime minister, he spoke that the biggest national security threat of India is within India, and he declared the Naxalites are the threat. So, and many Indians say that that was the reason he lost the election, because it is the Modi government which believes that, no, the biggest national security threat is Pakistan. So the Congress was soft on Pakistan, and so getting tough on Pakistan is basically the pulse of India. So I was talking to the former Indian ambassador yesterday at my show, and he said that that this comprehensive dialogue with Pakistan is over. Now everything will have to start again. The dialogue will be again. So nothing we discussed before is going to be on agenda. And do you think that this new, do you believe that that this Pakistan will agree to dialogue at this moment, because it will be very unpopular step engaging with India right now?
Oh, I agree. I don't think now is the time. I mean, the government has been telegraphing its sentiments about India right now with the strong rhetoric that I mentioned before. I think that the time simply isn't right. You can answer better than me, but my sense is that there's still so much anger and unhappiness about the Article 370 repeal, and also with, of course, how things have played out in Kashmir since the Article 370 repeal in terms of the lockdowns, which were happening before the world lockdown for the pandemic. So I just don't see this as the time for Pakistan to want to pick things up again. Now, again, I mean, things change. This is a relationship. I mean, we tend to think of the India-Pakistan relationship as one that's fraught, but there have been better times, as you'll know, right? I mean, not too long ago, at a moment when the US-Pakistan relationship was in a lot of trouble, 2010, 2011, 2012, you had some very considerable forward movements on the India-Pakistan relationship. There was the possibility of making major movement on trade relations to have Pakistan and India finally have an MFN-type trade relationship. Of course, it didn't work out well, but there is potential, and I think you need time. And in terms of what needs to happen in order to be more optimistic that things could improve, I really don't know. I just think there needs to be a lot more time. You have to hope that there won't be another Pulwama-type crisis, because let's face it, I mean, if there's another mass casualty terrorist attack in Kashmir, India will blame Pakistan, no matter whatever the facts are on the ground. and that could set things back. And here I think that the U.S. Typically can be very helpful in trying to encourage both sides to try to sort of push the needle forward a bit in terms of moving the tensions behind them a bit. But the Trump administration is occupied with many other things. There's an election coming up. I don't think you can look to the U.S. as playing that role. And at the end of the day, the U.S., because of its very strong relationship with India, doesn't want to get too involved in the India-Pakistan relationship, because then it would worry that India would worry that the U.S. is trying to get the two sides to start talking again, invariably about the Kashmir issue. And President Trump, of course, had offered multiple times to mediate if both sides agreed. And of course, India would never agree. So it's not really an offer. So I think, go back to what I said before, I think the India-Pakistan relationship is not necessarily going to get worse, but I don't really see it getting better, at least not in the near term.
I think this was a good conversation, but there is one more question that is coming from my viewers. There are many viewers who are watching us, and that question is that Americans are not being taken as a third party by the Indians. So how does this leave to the US that if there is no third party in the region or which cannot convince India to talk? So isn't it a moment of concern for the American government that, or not just for the American, but the Chinese, but the others, that is India so powerful now that they can deny anyone's mediation? Or where does this leave to Mr. Trump and American administration, who keeps on saying that I'm here to mediate?
Yeah, it's a great question. I'm not sure. Certainly, I think that India doesn't want the U.S. or any country to be a mediator, to be a third party in ordinary circumstances. But I don't think that India is opposed to U.S. mediation once an actual crisis breaks out. So basically, India doesn't want the Americans or anyone else to preemptively be mediating the dispute because of concern that it would bring things back to Kashmir. But certainly when you had the Pulwama and Balakot crisis, I mean, the U.S. was involved at that point, trying to narrow down, to reduce tensions, and that's been the pattern. I mean, you look at the Kargil crisis years back, some of these other low-grade conflicts between India and Pakistan. The U.S. has been there, and I don't necessarily think that India opposes that. I mean, India does not want to have another hot war with Pakistan. I think that's quite clear. I mean, there hasn't been anything like that since both countries became nuclear states. But certainly this does raise the question, if India doesn't want the U.S. involved, does it mean that it would not be receptive to some type of other country? Whether you're talking about the British or the Russians, I don't know about the Chinese, they don't get along with India. But you look at the idea of diversifying potential third-party mediators during crisis periods. And I think during the Balakot crisis, it wasn't only the U.S. that was involved. I believe the Chinese were involved, several countries in the Arab Gulf region. So I think that's an interesting question, is when you look at how the world order will evolve, what are some of the countries that could work with the U.S. or instead of the U.S., especially in the Trump era, to help mediate these crises to prevent them from getting out of hand between India and Pakistan?
Michael, it was a wonderful conversation, and I'm sure my viewers who have put a lot of questions as well, which I couldn't bring because my own questions couldn't end. So I'm really grateful for your time and your opinion. I'm sure there will be great feedback from Pakistan and from India, and definitely from Afghanistan who are watching. So thank you very much for time, and really appreciate that.
Thank you. I really appreciate you having me. Great discussion.
Thank you, Michael.
Take care.
Thank you.